Breaking Bad is the favorite show of countless people, including me, and for good reason. It's often hailed as the greatest, if not one of the greatest TV shows of all time. It's widely renowned for being so perfectly written, acted, shot, and directed. Across the 5 seasons, the show tells a complete and engaging story, and the episode adds a lot to the story and never drags on. The show has a massive amount of character development within the story and with almost every character. The story progresses in such a way that draws you in and hooks you with every moment. There's something so perfect about this show, and you can tell how much effort went into the making of it. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about the entire show. I'm here to analyze the first episode. I'll explain the episode, and I'll also be splitting it into sections where I'll talk about the different elements of what makes this episode so great, especially for it being a first. These include the characters, the story, cinematography, and I'll even go into symbolism and themes that are included within this episode. Let's start with the characters. Walter White is the main character of the show and is played by Bryan Cranston. Walter is a high school chemistry teacher who has a second job at a car wash. He works 2 jobs to supply for his family as much as he can, since they aren't the greatest financially, especially now since he and his wife have an unexpected pregnancy. From the very first scene of the show, after the intro, we can already see that he isn't very happy and that he's suffering from a midlife crisis. He feels very overwhelmed, frustrated, unappreciated, exploited, and unfulfilled. It's clear that Walter isn't satisfied with his life, as he feels overqualified and underpaid for what he does. Skyler White is Walter's wife, and she's played by Anna Gunn. She doesn't have a job and rather stays at home and makes income by writing short stories and selling things on eBay. She's a caring, supportive, and loving partner and mother who is trying to sustain a stable family during their financial situation. Walter Jr. is the son of Walter and Skyler and is played by RJ Mitte. He has cerebral palsy, as we can see from his speech difficulties and use of crutches. He's depicted as the typical teenager and is also portrayed as a caring and supportive son. He looks up to his father and tries to understand his struggles and issues. Hank Schrader is Walter's brother-in-law and also a DEA agent, played by Dean Norris. He's a very outgoing and confident character who's passionate about his work and often likes to share stories about his experiences in law enforcement. His strong presence and outgoing personality can act as a contrast to Walter's more reserved nature. Marie Schrader is Hank's wife and Skyler's sister, played by Betsy Brandt. Marie is a caring sister to Skyler, but can also be nosy and overly involved with other people's lives, along with comparing herself to others. She is shown to have a passion for interior design. Jesse Pinkman is a former student of Walter White and is played by Aaron Paul. He's involved in the drug scene not only through doing drugs, but also through making drugs. He's known on the streets as Captain Cook, and he's a low-level meth dealer who works with his fellow friend / cook Emilio. Jesse and Walter seem to be complete opposites, as they have opposite personalities and approaches to life. Jesse has a more rebellious and free-spirited nature, and has a liking for living life on the edge. Meanwhile, Walter is more serious and calculated. Jesse seems more driven by his emotions, while Walter is more methodical and prefers to think things through. In my opinion, the contrast within these characters is what makes their relationship so interesting and so entertaining. Anyway, those are basically all the main characters in this episode. Let's get into the story. The episode starts with Walter and Jesse in an RV driving fast in the desert. Walter is naked, apart from his underwear and shoes, and Jesse is passed out on the seat next to him. In the back, there seems to be 2 dead bodies and things falling and breaking from the violent shaking of the car. Walter loses control, causing the RV to go off-road and crash into a bush. He gets out of the car and starts panicking in frustration, but starts to hear the faint sounds of sirens getting closer. He grabs a gun from one of the dead bodies in the RV, along with his wallet and a camera. He turns on the camera and begins to record a video to his family. He basically explains that there'll be some things that they'll learn about him in the next few days, and that he had them in his heart. He then goes up to the road and he pulls the gun out. This is when the intro starts. This scene says a lot about the show as a whole, and I think it's a fantastic way to start the show. This is because it grabs your attention instantly by jump-starting straight into action, as well as setting the tone for the show. It can really intrigue the audience, especially if you have no idea what the show is about. The scene adds a layer of mystery and curiosity that makes the audience want to stick around to find out what could have led to such a strange situation. It's a perfect hook that grabs you instantly and leaves you wanting more. It then goes back to 3 weeks earlier, It's his 50th birthday and he's having breakfast with his wife and son. He goes to his job as a chemistry teacher and goes to his job at a car wash. The car that he wipes turns out to belong to a kid in his chemistry class, who makes fun of him, which is quite humiliating for Walter. When he comes home, he's greeted by a surprise birthday party with his family and friends. This is where we're introduced to Hank and Marie. During the party, they turn on the TV to watch Hank being interviewed on the news, talking about a meth lab bust. Walt notices the large amount of money, and when he asks, he finds out that it's about $700 grand. Hank talks a bit about it, and he says,
"It's easy money, till we catch you."
Hank also offers Walter to accompany him on a ride-along for a drug bust, if he's interested. The next day at the car wash, he passes out unexpectedly. He then discovers that he has inoperable lung cancer and has only a few years to live at best. We've actually seen this cancer being hinted, as he's been coughing in previous scenes. As the doctor is telling him this news, Walter zones out and seems distracted by a mustard stain on the doctor's suit. There could be many interpretations of why he does this, but my interpretation is that he's in shock by such terrible news, and is naturally trying to tune out the information by focusing on minor details like the mustard stain. Working back at the car wash, his boss asks him to wipe down cars again. However, Walter gets angry and has a fit, yelling at him and making a mess before storming off. It seems that the cancer was the tipping point, making him even worse emotionally than he already was, and he'd finally had enough.
Wipe down this!
Later that night, we see him lighting and throwing matches into a pool. I interpret this as him thinking about life and death, with the spark of fire being life, and the fire being put out by the water being death. This is also the moment he decides to go on the ride-along with Hank. The drug bust turns out to be Jesse and Emilio. While everyone else is checking the house, Walt notices Jesse climbing out the window, trying to escape. Walter and Jesse make eye contact and they recognize each other. Walter watches Jesse drive away, noticing Jesse's license plate being the Cap'n. Walt later comes to Jesse's house and offers to partner up and cook meth together. He threatens that if he declines, he'll turn him in, so Jesse is forced to accept. Walter then steals a load of chemistry equipment from the school and brings them to Jesse's house. Jesse mentions that they'll need a place to cook, and they agree on an RV. Walter takes all his money from his bank account and gives it to Jesse in order to buy the RV. Also, something kind of cool about this scene, this is the only time in the show that the title is mentioned.
Some straight like you giant stick up his ass, all of a sudden at age, 60, he's just gonna break bad?
They then cook in the middle of the desert, and Jesse takes a sample of the meth to his buddies Crazy 8 and Emilio, who had bailed out that morning. They all go to the RV in the desert to purchase the meth. However, Emilio recognizes Walter from being with the DEA during the bust. They're about to shoot them when Walter offers to teach them his recipe. However, he tricks them by creating phosphine gas and trapping them in the RV, killing them. He then starts driving away, and this is what leads to the teaser at the very beginning of the episode. He breaks down and tries to kill himself, but the gun fails to fire. The sirens were actually just the fire department going to put out the fire caused by Emilio throwing his cigarette into the grass. The last scene is of him getting into bed late. His wife asks where he was, and instead of answering, he seduces her. This is when the episode ends. This show being set in New Mexico was not a mistake, as its education system is one of the worst in the country. According to the New Mexico Public Education Department, the average graduation rate was about 54% for all students, which is significantly lower than other states. Another issue is funding. As you can see, the teachers were getting paid around $50,000 per year, and it's still a problem to this day. This is why we see Walter working 2 jobs, yet he's still having financial problems. A good example of where we see this is when Walter ends up wiping the car that belongs to one of his students, which is a very unusual situation that would rarely ever happen. Toxic masculinity is quite a big theme within Breaking Bad. In fact, it's actually quite a big theme within the entire show. However, since I'm just talking about the first episode, that's what I'll be getting into. We can see this quite early on in the show, how Walter is a stereotypical breadwinner, working 2 jobs while Skyler plays a typical housewife. Skyler does make some money from selling on eBay and through her short stories, but we can clearly see Walter as the primary earner. During the party scene, we can even see the women and the men splitting off, with the women in a group in the kitchen and the men grouped on the couches. During this scene, Hank makes a joke that also enforces toxic masculinity within the show.
It's just heavy. That's why they hire men.
There's a scene later in the episode with Skyler and Marie, where Marie mentions that Walt has been seeming off, and Skyler simply denies it without even thinking about it. We also see that in the last scene, Skyler questions him, but he doesn't even say anything, rather he just seduces her. It seems that the men have more power over the women, where the men have to be the ones supplying the family, and they have to be in control, which they are. The women just have to believe that the men are perfect and that they won't do anything wrong. Cinematography is another huge aspect of Breaking Bad, or of any show really. It can be a crucial role in storytelling by using visual elements to enhance the narrative and evoke emotions. In Breaking Bad's case, the cinematography is particularly important in setting the tone and atmosphere of the show. The use of different camera angles, lighting techniques, and framing choices help to create a sense of tension, suspense, and unease. It also contributes to the visual storytelling, allowing the audience to experience the story in a more immersive way. Looking at the first scene, we can see the use of wide shots to show the vastness and isolation of the New Mexico desert. We can even see that the color palette of the scene has warm tones and desaturated colors to reflect the harsh and gritty nature of the story. The cinematography can also enhance the storytelling. For example, when Emilio gets arrested, we see it through a handheld camera, giving us the perspective of people arresting him. This can make us feel included with the arrest, as if we're there and watching it happen firsthand. Another handheld example is when Walter is running frantically in the desert trying to put out the fire. The shakiness along with the close-up create a sense of urgency and chaos, along with adding a sense of rawness and intimacy, as it's like we're right there with him. There's a lot more to it when it comes to cinematography, but this is something I only wanted to touch on. In conclusion, this episode is a perfect way to start off a show. Right off the bat, we get this fantastic teaser that sets the tone for the show with its storytelling and cinematography, as well as leaving the audience wanting more. In just one episode, we get everything we need to know about the show. This includes their financial situation, Walt's cancer, the characters along with their conflicts and relations. We even get to see themes such as toxic masculinity. We also get to see hints of character development within the first episode. For example, how Walt is already forced to kill 2 people. While this episode is nearly an hour long, it still feels like there's so much that happens, and not in a bad way. This episode gives you all you need in terms of storytelling, cinematography, character, themes, and much more, as well as hooking the audience in and never dragging on. Anyway, that's it for me, at least for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.